The following conversations with Professor Loredana Padurean. Loredana is an author, public speaker, award-winning entrepreneur, and a professor at the Northeastern University in Boston. She is also unapologetically unconventional. Loredana, it is such a great privilege to have you today with me. I have known you already for a few years, and I got so inspired by you and your personality, everything what you are basically doing when we met in Boston for the first time, 5 years ago already now.
Wow.
And I would love to ask you about your journey to professorship, because I also realized that wasn't necessarily the very traditional way of becoming a professor.
There's very few things that are traditional about me. And I'm not saying this as a source of pride. I just want to use it mostly to maybe motivate people to understand that there's no traditional path that one has to follow in order to become whoever they want to be. So I am an accidental professor. I never intended to be one. And you and I have many things in common. And one of the things we have in common is our, I guess, Swiss experience. So I was born in Romania, in Transylvania, and by the age of 25, 26, when I graduated college and I had a couple of failed sort of startup experiences. Back then, we didn't call them startups. Back then, we called them unemployed, people who are unemployed and they are trying to employ themselves. So after I tried to get employed and nobody wanted to hire me, I hired myself. But it turns out I didn't know a lot of things about business. So I decided to go to Switzerland, and I signed up for a master's, and then within a couple of months of my master's, the school hired me as an administrator, and then they offered me a PhD. And I was one of the first students of the school in the PhD program because it was a brand new school. And to be very honest, I didn't want to become a professor because my role models were very, very, very different than what I expected. And they were primarily older white men who would come and sit, and I'm not just talking about Switzerland, I'm talking about Romania too. They would come and sit in class and read from a book. And it was so extraordinarily uninspiring. So when somebody offered me to do a PhD in order to become a professor, I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, why would I want to do that? No. But then they gave me $70,000 and I said yes. Because it turns out everybody has a prize. And at that point, my prize was $70,000, which was a lot of money. It was like 2-3 years of my PhD program. So I won a scholarship. And then I went to, this is so silly. I went to my advisor and I said, well, what am I going to do now that I got into the program, but we don't have a program? And he said, why don't you go and sign up to any school you think they might allow you to sort of observe, participate, visit. And I said, okay, I think I'm going to sign up for Harvard and MIT. And this guy laughed at me and he said, you little girl, do you even know how to spell Harvard? And I said, I think so, and I definitely know how to spell MIT. It's just MIT, right? He was extraordinarily patronizing, my former advisor, and he was a complicated man. But it turns out that if you insist a lot, you can actually find people who are kind and sweet and generous and tolerant. So I ended up taking a few courses at Harvard in the summer school program, which was really, really interesting because it showed me a different kind of teaching. And then I had a very kind professor at MIT who allowed me to visit and sit in his class. And then they showed me that you don't have to sit in class on your chair, read from a book to be a professor, but you can literally be exactly who you are. You can be your authentic version of yourself. And as long as you aspire to become the best version of your authentic self, you can literally be whoever you want.
It is really exciting. And I experienced you the first hand. I know how amazing you are as a professor, very unconventional, and you also call yourself very unconventional. And what comes with that is also your fantastic new book, Nail It, Scale It, Sail It, exactly. And that's also a very unconventional way of understanding entrepreneurship. I remember you introduced us to that concept at MIT. I would love to ask you how you came up with that particular concept.
Well, thank you for asking me this because I'm in the process of finalizing all the details for the book and publishing it. So I love to talk about this. And with your permission, I would like to use some of this content on my channel because all I do these days is just think and read and work on this book. So It actually started very much after I started my PhD program. So my professor from MIT, who's my co-author, and the professor you had at MIT, Professor Charles Fine, he advised me. I didn't want to do a conventional PhD. Surprise, surprise. And I wanted to do something applied, and I wanted to do something that has instant impact and very visible meaning. And sometimes I have to say, in academia, our results take a very long time to see sort of like kind of fruits. But MIT was always very famous for action learning and action research. And my professor said, why don't you do an action research project? So I ended up taking over a bankrupted ski resort in Switzerland and turning it around and writing my thesis about it. And I have to say, I've never skied in my entire life, Ivona, and I hate winter and I hate snow and I really don't like mountains. But, you know, I like unconventional projects. And while I was doing this, my advisor and my professor, who was my co-author on the book, he came to visit a couple of times, and he would always tell me, I need to do this, I need to establish processes, I need to create structure, so he would give me business advice. And I remember having a conversation with him and saying, I think it's too early for me to have processes. And he sort of like sat there for a second and said, that's an interesting hypothesis. So what you're saying is, there's the right time for establishing processes. And that was the seed of the book. What do I mean by this? We started to question ourselves and say, in the evolution of a company from a startup to a large corporation, are there specific dynamics, specific steps, specific behaviors and attributes that are very specific to that stage? And they are very, very different in different stages. So I'm saying this because this is very, very important for me to say. Our research is very applied, and our research is very much informed by industry. So after we had this hypothesis, I started to test some things in my business, and then we started to interview a lot of companies. We interviewed this tiny startup in 2013 called Tesla. And people were laughing at us when we were telling them that we're interested in this tiny company that is building a car in California. It's not that tiny anymore. But we ended up interviewing, I don't know, maybe more than 50 companies, hundreds of CEOs, founders, startup entrepreneurs like yourselves. So the entire book was informed from primary research, secondary research with the industry. And I'm gonna end up with this, and by running a lot of programs, which you were part of these programs too, right? So we pretty much asked to be in front of an audience as much as possible. So I wanted to be in front of audiences like you, startup founders, company founders, co-founders who had the experience of what we were researching. So when I would come, for example, to the MIT bootcamp where you and I met, I wanted to share my thoughts, but I also wanted to get some validation and input and feedback, because the second somebody would say something, I would go back and put it into the research. And actually, I'm not sure we should say this before the book is out, but one of your colleagues in the MIT bootcamp said something in the bootcamp that sort of dramatically informed our next step of research. So, and we even quoted him here, because he said, you know, how do you know when you're done scaling, and how do you know when it's time to move? And I thought about that for a long time, and we actually ended up, like I said, we ended up quoting him in the book, and Andrew. And so, like I said, for us, what was very important was not only that it started with a very applied curiosity, but then the research was very much a back and forth between industry and ourselves and industry. We ran, Ivona, it has to be more than 300 workshops, executive programs, boot camps, I don't know, entrepreneurial competitions. And pretty much it was a collective effort. So there's 2 co-authors on the book, but there's thousands, literally thousands of contributors.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Do you consider yourself more like a nailer or a scaler?
So before I answer that, let me just give a little bit of background to the people who don't understand what we're talking about. So this book, and I'll talk a little bit about the format because everybody's probably wondering why there's a comic book. I thought she was a serious professor. No, she's not a serious professor. She's an unconventional.
Very unconventional, exactly.
So we started by mapping the evolutionary journey of a company's growth. So in the beginning, when you're a startup, we call it the nail it stage. As you're growing and you're growing your company, your capabilities, your products, etc., we call that the scale it stage. And when you become a corporation, when you become, let's say, a large, mature organization, sometimes it doesn't have to be large, but you have to be mature, we call that the sailing stage. And each of these stages have a different set of attributes, if you want. So, for example, we say that nailing feels a little bit like hacking through a jungle with very little but a machete. Nailing feels more like hiking up a mountain where now you have more resources and more predictability. And then sailing feels like, if you want, running a tank ship in the ocean where everybody has clarity of roles, of responsibilities, etc. And to your question, what am I? Accidentally, in the research process, we identified that there's a specific behavior of people who tend to thrive more or less in one of these stages. So, for example, people who get excited about solving new problems for the first time, people who get excited about early stage startups, who don't like rules, who don't like processes, who work better with frugality and speed, we call them the nailers. People who love to create processes for first time, they come in a startup environment, they look around and it's like, oh, this is a mess. Let me clean it up. Let me build some processes, some rules, maybe some manuals. And they thrive better in a scaling organization. We call those the scalers. And then people who love the corporate space, who love to be part of a large, mature organization with sophisticated tools, with sophisticated systems, and they get excited about running systems. We call them the sailors. So it was very obvious to me early on that I'm a nailer because I don't really like processes, rules, structure. I work very well in what it's perceived to be a chaotic environment. They are not really chaotic. They are just, I guess, iterative environments, right? Where you have to go and try to learn how to do things. If it doesn't work, you go back. But in our research, the most important thing that we found out is that in order to run a successful company, you need all three profiles. And we actually have two secondary profiles, organizers and stabilizers, who help companies transition, but you need all three. You just need to know when to hire and who to hire for what job. So the match is very important.
Can we also become scalers and nailers in this case? Can we learn the skills and then naturally jump into the next stage? How do you feel about this?
So I have research for this, and I also have sort of like my personal beliefs. So our research says that primarily individuals have a natural self and then an adaptive self. So for example, if my natural self is somebody who thrives in fast-paced, constantly changing environments, but so this is my natural self. But I find myself in a very predictable, in a very slow, in a very sort of much more sophisticated environment, it's going to be some level of pain, right? Because my natural self is very different than what my environment is asking. What research, especially in psychology, says is that we also have an adaptive self. I know this is a very long answer, but the answer is not that simple. So the adaptive self could probably adapt or adjust to different environments. But if your adaptive self and your natural self are very far away, right? So if you're asking me to do something that is very, very, very unnatural to me, I will suffer a lot more than I will create. So the simple answer is, theoretically, humans can be everything they ever want. Practically, we have not found yet somebody who can be all three. What we found leaders who are aware enough to understand that they need to surround themselves with people of different profiles. Now, it also means that, for example, if you're a serial entrepreneur, somebody who ran 10, 15 startups, you probably anticipate better the stages of evolution and you can prepare for that, right? We have not found yet somebody who can do it all, which is good, because that's why you need now cooperation and collaboration from others.
How do you think the smart skills, as you call them, can, and the sharp skills, of course, both, and that you also coined the, exactly, that's the book.
This is
coined these terms. The job is easy, the people are not. How do you feel the sharp and the smart skills influence the environment, especially on the nailing side of the business?
That's a great question. I'm so proud of you for being my student. Now I can learn from you. So
learning from the best, Loredana, learning from the best.
Yeah, I'm learning from the best. So when I first wrote this book, so this is my first book. It's called The Job is Easy, The People Are Not. It was almost like a cry for help, personal cry for help, because I was in a leadership position for almost 8 years when I lived in Malaysia. And I was part of creating a new school in Malaysia called Asia School of Business. And I have to say, after almost 8 years of leadership, I had enough, because I was like, actually, the original title of the book was supposed to be I Hate People and Other Management Lessons, because the more I know people, the less I like them. So if you want to be my friend, I have to know you very little. I'm joking, or not. But in the process of complaining about people, which, by the way, I don't know if you know, but 25% of our time in the workplace is spent complaining about other people. 25%.
Horrible.
It's more than a day a week where we complain about them. And I didn't want to write just another complaining book, you know? So I started to think about all the complaints that I constantly received, or I was the generator of the complaints. And I realized that if I write down all these complaints, and I have in my programs, I usually do this exercise with other people, and I'm not kidding you, I have over 25,000 complaints. All of them are very similar eventually, but you see what people start to complain about collectively. And I thought, all right, if we complain so much, what's the solution? So I came up with a set of skills, so you can call them, I'm not into semantics very much, so, but I call them sort of like skills that counter some of the behaviors that we complain a lot about. So I call these skills smart skills, because there's nothing soft about them. Like traditionally in semantics, we call this soft skills and hard skills. And there's nothing soft about emotional maturity. There's nothing soft about managing people. There's nothing soft about being cognitively ready, about being adaptable, about being humble, about all of these things. So I call them smart skills, because if you don't have them, you're not very smart. And for the people who follow me on Instagram, I think you heard me talk about mumus, which mumu, it's an African word that I use to replace the word idiot, because Instagram doesn't like when I use the word idiot, because apparently idiot is a very, very harsh word. Today in this world, really, that's the biggest problem that you have. So we call these skills smart skills. And then I also don't like the word hard skills, because I don't know for you, but when I was growing up, I was always told that math, physics, chemistry, those are the hard skills. Those are the important skills. Those are the critical skills. And in my experience as a leader, I don't see a lot of people complaining about colleagues not being competent enough in math or chemistry or physics or engineering, but mostly we complain about people skills. So in the smart skills category, some of the skills that I think are critical for working well with other people are emotional maturity, which is the first skill presented in the book, validation, humility. Humility is very misunderstood, because humility is not modesty. So humility, I define humility as the ability to understand that the more you learn, the less you know. And for an entrepreneur, humility is probably the number one skill that you need to practice, because on one hand, you have to be very confident in what you know. So you have to be confident in competence, because confidence only comes from competence. Otherwise, it's called arrogance. And competence only comes from humility, in the sense that a competent person is a learning person. And you only learn if you realize that the more you learn, the less you know. So humility is very, very important, especially for nailers, early stage startup entrepreneurs. But I would also say one of the things that was very surprising for us in our research, and actually in our practice, was validation. So people are extraordinarily annoying because they need validation a lot. Some people need a lot of validation, some people need very little. And if you manage people, and if you're a founder, for example, of a startup and you manage people, you don't really give them traditional validation metrics. Like you don't really give them bonuses and promotions and new titles because it's a startup. What's somebody going to do with the title when you're like 10 people in a company, right? And also you cannot always give more and more money. So you need to validate differently. And some people are validation addicts in the sense that they need a lot of validation and they become, we call them high maintenance, or, they suck the energy out of the room. We call them energy vampires. But the truth is that everybody needs validation. We just need different amounts. So I think it's extraordinarily misunderstood in the world of startups and entrepreneurship how much smart skills you need as a founder, because you need to sort of counter all the other handicaps that you have as a founder when you hire people, which is you compete for talent. And most of the time, the talent will be primarily attracted by your value proposition, your mission, and your ability as a leader to get people excited.
Mm. That's really fascinating, especially when we see that the smart skills are very often much more important than the sharp skills.
Yeah.
But when you think about the sharp skills, which ones do you feel like are right now very much needed, especially when we see what is happening in the new technologies these days?
So I wrote this in 2022, and I added digital literacy back then into it. And people were like, well, can you be more specific? And I said, no, I cannot be more specific because technology is moving so much faster than our ability to understand it. So when I say digital literacy, what I mean is you don't need to become an expert in one kind of technology, but you have to become digitally literate, right? So what do I mean by literacy? Well, literacy is, how to read and write primarily and how to communicate. For me, digital literacy, it's exactly that I might not know exactly how ChatGPT how ChatGPT was created, how it works, but God damn it, look at me. I wrote an entire book using ChatGPT, right? And I'm not a technology person by any means, but I am learning how to use it in a way that serves my needs. So I would say digital literacy, once again, in the context of understanding what the tool is supposed to do for you. So I tell, for example, a lot of the CEOs that I work with, you don't need to understand what, a specific technology does as a technology. You need to understand how to ask questions for that technology to help you. But you can only do that if you combine both smart and sharp skills, right? Because I used to be a digital transformation coach, consultant. And at some point, up until 2022, about 80% of the investments in digital transformation used to fail. 80%. Like, that's insane. Once I started investigating why, one of the reasons is that people resisted change because people are afraid of change. And they don't really understand what change is going to do. So I would coach board of directors and be like, sir, mostly sirs, sir, this is not as complicated as it seems. Don't allow yourself to be intimidated by techno jargon from, software consultants who are trying to sell you something. Go back to the basics and ask why. Why do I need this? Why do I need to do it this way? So that's humility, right? Because humility says the more you learn, the less you know. But the essence of humility is arrogance. And arrogance says, I already know everything. I don't need to ask. Or people are intimidated to ask because they don't want to look stupid. So, what it's interesting. We talk so much about artificial intelligence, but we still have a lot of human intelligence to deal with. So you have to have both. You have to have both. Like, a lot of people are saying, so you didn't do any work for this book, right? ChatGPT did it all. And I have to tell you, I would smack them over the head because this was the hardest project of my entire life. But ChatGPT allowed me to do it in a way that 4 years ago, when I started thinking about it, would have required 15 people and a huge budget. And now I pretty much did most of the drawing by myself, and obviously my co-author and I worked together on this. But once again, digital literacy, it's understanding what technology can do for you. You don't really have to understand how that technology was created.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So from all of the different skills that you also describe in these books, which ones do you feel like are necessary these days when it comes to the smart skills, but also to the sharp skills? When someone, for example, starts a career or starts to study at the university.
So one of the things that we found out is that the sharp skills get you the job, the smart skills get you the promotion. Let me say that again. The sharp skill get you the job, the smart skills get you the promotion or the exit, right? So you do need to have some level of expertise when somebody hires you, right? You need to be good at something. But the more you advance in your career, the less sharp skills you need and the more smart skills you need. Now, I would also say this. It's hard for me to choose one because I'm not a parent, but I assume if you were to ask parents, tell me which kid you like better, which every parent knows for a fact that they have one kid that they like better. But I would say not because I think it's a better skill or a more important skill, but mostly because it's the base. I would say that emotional maturity is probably the most important one to master so you can master the rest, right? So if, for example, I were to share some of this, I don't know if you can see, but we have emotional maturity, cognitive readiness, adaptability, humility, listening, managing multiple perspectives, etc. So emotional maturity, it's almost the base that allows you to practice the others. Now, emotional maturity is not emotional intelligence. I think a lot of people believe that emotional intelligence is it. No, emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize emotions, yours and of others. But emotional intelligence is not specific to humans. Like my dog is emotionally intelligent. I mean, his IQ is not very high, but he still can recognize my emotions and he can express emotions. Emotional maturity is the ability to calibrate those emotions, is the ability to sort of like understand the intensity of the display of the emotion in the necessary moment, right? So for example, right now, I have a terrible headache. I haven't had a headache in months. I think I'm dehydrated. I also have a little bit of a cold. My natural self right now is very tired. It also requires me a lot of capacity to concentrate. And I feel very frustrated that I have to do this now at the lowest version of myself, instead of doing it a few days from now when I could be the best version of myself and give you the best. If I were highly emotionally immature, I would allow these emotions to take over. And I would probably be a lot grumpier or a lot like, I don't want to do this. Why am I doing this, right? That's your natural self. Emotional maturity comes into place and says, okay, Loredana, you accepted this. You want to prepare for this. People are interested in your thoughts, hopefully. So bring the best version of your emotions at play and put those aside. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not sharing my emotions, but I'm not allowing the emotions to take over, to take control. So it's very much about managing your emotional response. Now, remember when I talked about people complaining always, like thousands and thousands of reasons why people complain? Turns out a lot of the reasons for complaints are from the emotional maturity space. For example, people are selfish. They are I don't know, they shout. They are passive aggressive. They are jealous. They are God knows what. A lot of this comes from emotional maturity or the absence of it. Now, how you develop emotional maturity and how you practice it, that's a whole nother podcast, which I'm very happy to talk about. But in this book, I have created a revised version where I have 2 new chapters specifically dedicated, one to emotional maturity and burnout, because they're highly correlated, and one to managing multiple generations. And multiple generations and emotions are also so connected, and generational trauma is like, oh my God, it's so complicated. It's such a mess. People are complicated. We are complicated.
That's true. That would be actually the next question I wanted to ask you about, how to, but let's wait for the next recording, next podcast on this particular topic. I would love to ask you about a different type of skill, the language skills, or, Loredana, tell us how many languages do you speak? And actually, how did you learn all of the different languages that you speak?
So I would say this, I have various levels of fluency in the languages that I speak, and also fluency, because it's fluent, it comes and goes. So I was educated in 7 languages. Now I speak fluently only a handful, because you lose languages if you don't speak them. So my first language is Romanian. The second language that I learned was French. The third language was Russian, because I grew up in Romania and it was mandatory. And also I loved Russian as the sound, as the grammar. I used to attend international competitions. Then I learned English because I realized very early on that I actually want to maybe work abroad. So I learned English. I learned Italian, and I learned Spanish, and I learned German when I lived in Switzerland. So I say that I could probably get away in most countries. Like when I lived in India, I learned Hindi very, very quickly. I love Hindi. It's such an amazing language. My brain was just like, whoop. But when I lived in Malaysia, I never understood Bahasa, which is so interesting because Bahasa, it's a simple language, but my brain didn't have the right, I don't know, algorithm, because I speak European languages. And, in Hindi is Sanskrit. A lot of Sanskrit languages come from European languages, or the other way around, I'm sorry. Now, I would say this. People ask me all the time, did you learn languages because you learn languages? No, I learned languages because they were a mean to an end for me. They were an opportunity for me to do something that I wanted to do. Like I learned languages in school because they allowed me to study, not to study, but they allow me through the study of languages to explore new things.
Mm-hmm.
They allowed me to travel, to meet people from other countries. So I don't study languages because I had nothing better to do as a hobby. I don't really do that. But I think today, not learning any other language but yours, it's a huge sign of arrogance. Like, shut up, be humble, learn another language, even if you don't speak it well. Like I have to say, I used to be very fluent in German when I lived in Switzerland. Now, it's going to take me 10 minutes to come up with a really good sentence in German.
Our next interview is in German, Loredana.
Yes, probably if I were to move back to Switzerland or to Germany or to Austria, it would come back eventually. The same way Russian for me right now feels almost like a foreign territory. But I would also say this. There's a lot of neuroscience research that says that people who speak more than one language have higher abilities to solve problems, which makes sense because learning a new language and then having to think in the other language probably activates part of the brain that otherwise just sit there quietly with very little to do. So I think languages are an amazing bridge to another culture. I think it's a sign of respect for a different people. I went to Peru last year and I gave a talk in Lima, and I pretty much brought all the Spanish that I knew to that talk. And people were so like sweet and kind and funny about it. And obviously my Spanish is not great, but it was good enough for me to start building a relationship. And you see instantly how people open up, when you try something. Like I remember one of my one of my favorite movies when I was growing up was a Polish show. And I think it was called Black Clouds. And I remember very well from Spanish learning, Dziękuję, panie polkowniku. Dziękuję, panie polkowniku. What does it mean, Ivana? What does it mean, dziękuję, panie polkowniku?
Thank you, Sergeant.
Yes.
That's how I would translate it directly.
It was in the military, but I remember meeting a couple of Polish people who came to Boston and they were lost and they couldn't find whatever they were looking for. And I don't even remember if I knew how to say hello but I knew dziękuję. I said, dziękuję, panie. And all of a sudden he was like, oh, dziękuję, dziękuję. And he started talking to me. I was like, whoa, 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 that's all I know. But it was an attempt of almost saying like, I'm a nice person and I'm going to try,
Yeah,
So
which is beautiful. Absolutely. I'm asking this specific question because you were challenged, and I'm also very often challenged about my very specific accent when I speak foreign languages. And
let me roll
answered...
my eyes very obviously.
And you answered so beautifully because you said that your accent comes from knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is such a beautiful answer. But my question would be rather about something else. How do you deal actually with hate speech, especially on social media?
Hate speech?
Yeah, hate speech or any type of, negative vibes coming out from social media?
So I accidentally went viral on this video that you mentioned about languages and knowledge. So I would say this. I'm an East European woman. And by default, being a woman and being Eastern European, as you know, in Europe especially, is a handicap. Now, obviously, when I moved to US, I also became a European to Americans. And I have to say, I live in Boston. It's a very, very smart city. It's a very educated city. I also live in parts of, I mean, I interact with parts of the American community who doesn't know as many things, or they don't know as many things as other people do, which is fine. So I have days and days, like specifically when I got this comment on the video that went viral, it was one of thousands of similar comments where somebody was very patronizing towards my accent. Oh, is English your second language because you have quite an accent? See, that's one way of asking the question versus, do I detect a little bit of an accent? You must speak so many other languages, right? It's the same question, but the intention is very different. The first intention was to put me down. Like, oh. And
so
was
cute,
like,
Loredana.
so cute. Oh, you have a PhD, so cute. I got that before. Somebody told me, oh, you have a PhD, so cute. So if you ask me about my accent, and if you ask me with the right intentions, I will tell you about Romania and Transylvania and how proud I am and how many other languages I learn and how much I love India and how much I love. Great. If you ask me in a patronizing way, then I will use maybe humor and sarcasm and a little bit of cynicism to show you that you're actually making fun of your own ignorance, not of me. You're not making fun. What? Are you making fun of the fact that I speak 7 languages and you speak 1? Really? Are you making fun of your own stupidity? So how do I deal with hate speech? With humor. Actually, I don't have a lot of hate speech on my social media because I primarily attract people who I guess are kind and nice and sweet, and we call each other smarties. But every now and then we have a mumu who feels the need to put me down, and I'm like, so this guy told me recently that why am I bragging about the fact that I speak 7 languages, which I never bragged. And I said multiple times, I'm not fluent in 7 languages. I can get away and get around in 7. But this guy said 7 languages in only 0.01% of the languages in the world. So why am I bragging about? And I said, I'm actually not bragging about. It's true that I only speak like 0.01% of the languages. But I said, do you know that 0.1% of the population in the world speaks more than 5? Do you know that 0.1% of the population in the world has a PhD? Like, do you really want me to give you evidence of why am I superior to you? Which I never want to do, but if you really want to come after me, boy, oh boy, I have so many tools. Like, I'm educated, I'm smart, I'm traveled. I'm humble too, because I know how much I don't know. So I have yet to see hate speech coming from people who are more educated than you are. For people who have more formal and informal education, because I'm not all about formal education. So I don't know, it's funny, I guess.
That's so interesting. You know, what came to my mind right now is that what I heard from someone, people who do more than you do, they will never criticize you.
Yes, exactly. Like, I want to give you an example about humility. So I had a professor at MIT, still do. I'm not at MIT anymore, but Professor Bob Merton. And Professor Bob Merton won a Nobel Prize in economics for the Black-Scholes theory. Now, I met him in person, and I actually got the amazing honor of introducing him as a speaker to one of our events. And after the event, I went to him and I said, Bob, I have to ask you what it's like to have a Nobel Prize. Like, what is that feeling when you know that you are like, it's like 0.0007% of the planet. 700 people apparently who got a Nobel Prize. And he looks at me, he's so sweet. He says, Loredana, he's American Italian. He said, it was really great for a few days. I was like, oh, look at me, I have a Nobel Prize. And then I realized there's people who have 2. And I was like, Bob, there's 7 people who have 2 Nobel Prizes. He's like, I can't be too braggy about it because I only have 1. And I thought, you see, Bob has a Nobel Prize, and Bob doesn't think that he's the, that everything, because there's people who have two. So, I know that a lot of people think that I'm arrogant because I usually answer from a place of knowledge, because that's my ethos. My ethos is education. But I have yet to be criticized by people who are tangibly more educated, more informed, more whatever, So, ma va, ma chi se ne frega, come dicono gli italiani, ma chi se ne frega, ma va.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's really important. Important a realization actually to know that people who do more than we do will never criticize you, but also to be really grounded in our knowledge and learning and the journey actually we are on right now. Talking about journey, I'm curious to learn about your future plans and aspirations. If there's anything you can share with us today, I would be very curious to learn that.
What do I want to do in my future? Oh my goodness. So I think for me, future is a very, very short concept, because I think I think of myself as a very curious person, extraordinarily curious. And I think curiosity is probably one of the most important life skills to have. And because I'm curious, I feel like it's very hard for me to look ahead at a very long future and be like, this is what I want to do next. But I would say what I aspire for this book to be a bestseller, not because you make money with books, guys, don't worry about that. It's not that. But I believe so much in this framework, and I have so much data from people who use this framework. So I really want this book to be valuable. The word bestseller is misplaced here, but I want this book to become very, very useful and very practical. And I want people to feel like, oh yeah, now I learn a lot. So I hope that for the next 2-3 years, maybe 5, I travel the world and I share the insights from this book. And then I also learn from insights from the community who's enjoying this experience. One of the interesting things that happened to me in the past 4 years was that I realized that I don't get validation, or I don't need validation anymore the way I used to need. I still need validation because I'm a human being, but I need very different kind of validation. So when I left Asia and I moved back to US, I had to think about what kind of job I want next. And I had a associate dean title, which the next thing would be dean or president. And this was a big aha moment for me. It was probably the most important aha moment I had in the last 10 years. When I realized that I actually don't want the job, I just want the title. I don't want the job, I want the title. And then I thought, why do I want the title? And then I thought, I actually don't need the title anymore either. So for me, that was a massively important professional sort of like enlightenment. Because for a very long time, I wanted the title. I didn't know what the job was. Then as I was going through the job, I wanted the title, but not the job. And when I had the next sort of critical professional milestone, I realized I actually don't want the title nor the job. So why am I saying this? I don't know what I want to do in the next 5 years. I just know that I want to share what I learn. I want to learn from other people, from their sharing. And in what format, I don't care. I really don't care. People told me, oh, you're just a professor these days. You used to have a fancy title. And I look at them as like, just a professor. This is the best job in the world for me, because I get to do exactly what I want. So I guess, like I said, I want to share my learnings, not my knowledge, because it's not knowledge, my learnings. I want people to share their learnings with me. I guess my need for validation comes from being useful now. This is where my need comes. My need for validation is less personal, less egocentrical. I guess I'm a little bit less of a egoistic person or narcissistic. I'm not a narcissist, but I do have some narcissistic traits like most of us. I'm dramatically less of a people pleaser than I used to be. So I don't know. I don't know. I have to go back and think about this question. I have to go and ask my shrink to ask me this question.
I had another one. Maybe that would
Okay,
help
ask
you.
me another one.
If you had a chance to speak to your 20 years old self,
Hmm.
what would you tell her?
Oh, she would be so damn proud. She would look at me and be like, girl, look at us. Look at what we did. Oh my God, that's amazing. So I have these conversations with my 20-year-old self all the time because I went through a little bit of therapy, not a lot. My therapist was so effective that after 5 sessions, she said, okay, you're good to go. Come back in a year for a tune-up if you want. But I would say that my 20-year-old self, which is probably very typical to a lot of 20-year-olds, was highly insecure, needed a lot of external validation, was extraordinarily sensitive to criticism because I grew up in a generation where criticism was the language of love. And for me, validation is the language of love. And I would say, you know what? We had to go through a lot of shit, but we'll make it. And I guess that she's definitely super proud and she can't believe some of the things that we're experiencing today. Yeah, it's very hard to go back and tell your past self what to do or what not to do. But I use this with my students. So I think of this question a lot in my attempt to help my students. So I try to help my students deal with insecurities because the 20s are the worst age ever. Like, I don't think there's anything worse than being 20, maybe being 90 and not being healthy. But being 20 is like, ugh, if I could skip it, terrible. I mean, the only good thing about your 20s is that your muscles are still very like plump and tough. But your 20s are all about figuring out who you are, allowing voices to influence you or not. You're trying to figure out what your space in the world is. So I would tell again my 20-year-old self, don't worry, your 20s sucks, but the 30s and the 40s, whew, wait until we hit 50. Like, my God, it's gonna be so awesome.
Very cool. Thank you so much for sharing, Loredana. I deeply appreciate your time today and all of the wisdom and knowledge you shared with us. And I wish you the greatest success you can imagine for your book. And I cannot wait to read this. So thank you for making this happen also for us and for allowing us to learn from you.
Thank you. And for everybody who's watching, I'll try to share with Ivona some links where you can find it. But if you can't find it, just Google me. By now, you should find something. I used to say 15 years ago, just Google me, I'm that famous, because it was a joke. I wasn't famous at all, but Google is pretty good these days, so you can find a lot of stuff. Thank you, and all the best of luck to you for your adventures and for putting together an interesting conversation, which I hope a lot of other people will find it valuable.
I'm sure. Thanks, Loredana. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Creative Bites. It's been a pleasure sharing these stories and insights with you. Remember, creativity is all around us, ready to be discovered, nurtured, and celebrated. I'm Ivona Fluda, and until next time, keep creating, keep exploring, and keep inspiring. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.